Hi, this is Sean Maney from FirstLight Ministries. We're working to raise $100,000 by the end of the year to bring healing to even more people in 2025. Your generosity will help us develop our services, expand our community, and see lives forever changed by the gospel. Visit our website or click the link in the description to give today.
And that's possibly the most difficult part about long-term sobriety. The very thing that drove you to porn, masturbation, whatever addiction, is the thing that you're now saying, let's face it.
I've used my sexuality in the past to manage everything. And a lot of guys are going to come to their wives and say, hey, honey, can you manage my sexuality for me? It's not her fault if she says no to sex and he isn't able to manage. It's still his responsibility to learn how to manage that.
Welcome to Saints Sexuality, a podcast by FirstLight Ministries for educating ministry leaders and strugglers about the causes, aftermath, and treatment of addictive sexual behaviors. Sobriety is a major milestone in the recovery journey, but it's not the final destination. Lasting transformation happens when we experience a new way of living by coping with our emotions in a healthy way. In today's episode, Reverend David Noble and Bryce Wilkins dive into long-term sobriety and how life's challenges, like marriage or the holiday seasons, can test even the most well-intentioned recovery plans. Let's get started.
Whatever you were doing that you want to stop, that was actually helping you to exist and continue surviving within a difficult moment, time of life, season, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you were doing, you've now come to this place where you've realized that needs to be removed, acknowledging the weight, the pain, the damage, while simultaneously working towards the external to create the boundaries and the security and the steps needed to provide stability. You're either just doing the thing to numb out, or you're taking the very difficult first steps of removing and replacing that habit, that addiction. Then, while exiting survival mode, that brings you to a place where you have the bandwidth to start looking at the things in your life that you previously couldn't address because you were so focused on being numb. Mm-hmm. And that's possibly the most difficult part about long-term sobriety. The very thing that drove you to porn, masturbation, whatever addiction, is the thing that you're now saying, let's face it, let's engage it, let's acknowledge what needs to be acknowledged instead of running away. Mm-hmm. And that, coupled with the idea of relapse is to be expected, is what makes it so difficult to attain long-term success. Because you're trying something that you couldn't do before, and you're expecting to never fail because you shouldn't. Because God doesn't want you to, and now you've known success, so you should always be successful. Mm-hmm. But the reality is failure is part of getting stronger. Mm-hmm. And I hate that. I don't want to sin again. I don't want to be okay with the fact that I'm going to sin again. But that's part of it. And being able to accept that and being able to find the people that can go with me into engaging what previously I had to run away from in order to survive. That's what leads towards long-term sobriety.
Failure is part of the progress. Because, I guess the way I think about it is like in sobriety, I start, as you said, to be able to notice things that I wasn't able to notice before. Now I'm able to do that deeper work of addressing childhood wounds or addressing ways that I've been betrayed or addressing these other more complicated griefs and losses in my life that I wasn't even able to access prior to finding some length of sobriety. Dealing with those triggers or destabilizers that I've never had to cope with before. And so in order to continue to progress, we have to keep getting closer to the edge of failure, if not outright falling into the ditch, and learning how to get back out again. And so I do think when talking about relapse, it is important to say that generally the types of relapses we see are de-escalations of behavior rather than escalations of behavior. If in the past I used to act out with other people, a relapse would not include acting out with other people again. Or if in the past I used to pay for sex, future relapses would not include paying for sex. That it would be de-escalated to porn and masturbation. Or if in the past relapse used to be looking at porn for 3 hours and masturbating twice, that this would be less frequency or duration. If you're doing the things that we talked about of practicing the presence of God, going to a sufficient number of meetings, reaching out, breaking that isolation, and doing a little bit of work on a daily basis, if you're doing those things, you are going to start seeing a de-escalation in the type of acting out if you relapse. If the behavior itself is escalating, there's a bigger problem at play that needs to be addressed. If that's one part of the caution, the other part of the caution would be exchanging addictive behaviors. Someone might say, I've been sober from porn for 3 months, but I've been day drinking. I've now established a new habit of gambling, sports betting.
I stopped looking at 2 hours of porn a day, but now I watch 10 hours of YouTube.
I've substituted for...
It's innocuous. I'm safe.
Yeah. So essentially, I'm just self-medicating in a different way. And I'm still not addressing those deeper issues. And I think that's another danger of using days of sobriety as the only metric for measuring sobriety, or for measuring progress, I should say. Because yes, it is good that you're not looking at porn if it means, I ate a few more calories, watch more YouTube, play an extra 30 minutes of video games. Maybe I exercise a little more compulsively. That's part of learning how to cope with life on life's terms. And it's not the same thing as now I have a opioid drug addiction, or I have an alcohol problem, or I have, 10 hours a day of YouTube. When the destabilizing event happens that in the past would have driven us into a well-rehearsed physical pattern or ritual around the acting out behavior, physiologically we get stuck in that loop. And what needs to change to get ourselves into another way of living, it actually begins with self-compassion. When that destabilizing event happens, like my boss came to me and said, hey, I need to see you in my office in 10 minutes. And I immediately think I'm in trouble. And that takes me to a place that I don't want to go. It takes me to a place of saying, I can't tolerate this feeling. And so I'm going to find ways to distract myself. And the most effective ways I've found in the past have been looking at porn, because that's a pretty powerful distractor. Instead, can I be self-compassionate and say, oh, I am responding to this summons from a place of shame. I don't really know why he wants to talk to me. I don't know that I'm in trouble, but it's understandable that I would respond this way. Can I take a moment before I go talk to my boss to make a phone call and just say, hey, my boss just called me into his office. I'm feeling shame about that. I'm noticing the ways that I want to go into preoccupation. I want to numb out, but I want to do something different. For that other person to say to you, it's normal that I would be a little freaked out that my boss, without any kind of explanation, would say, hey, I need to talk to you in 30 minutes. Maybe you are in trouble. I don't know. But I will do better if I go in fully present to my emotions and to what he wants or she wants to say to me than if I'm bracing for shock.
If I step into a situation unregulated, it will make it more difficult to decipher what's being communicated. Are you saying self-compassion can help temper how we receive those potentially critical moments?
Yeah, I guess I was conflating two things of self-compassion and reaching out and letting someone relate to our experience and extend compassion.
Gotcha.
Whether it's self-compassion or someone else reflecting that compassion to us, it starts to take us into a different direction than the old pattern of isolation, self-loathing, condemnation. So in the long term, for me to be able to shift from old behaviors to new behaviors, there has to be an aspect of compassion in that.
Which is super difficult when you hate yourself for the things that you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to have those people you can reach out to. Oh man, I've been called into the office by my boss before and always assumed the worst
Sure.
as well.
Sure.
I'm sorry for what you're going through. It makes sense you're feeling that way.
Which is more likely to happen when you already have a rhythm of reaching out that's not merely, I messed up.
Yeah.
I also think this is one of the things that FirstLight offers that isn't merely sobriety, because the end goal is not just keeping myself abstinent from this activity or that action. One of the difficult hurdles that people have to get past when entering into FirstLight is, I'm not here just to stop looking at porn. I'm entering into this community to be discipled and disciple others.
Yeah.
To know the way of Jesus is better in my life and to help walk with other people in that way.
Yeah. Part of ongoing sobriety is figuring out how to talk to your spouse about your recovery and restoration journey. That's different for every couple. Some couples are going to need daily check-ins and disclosures. Others are going to find that cumbersome and destructive, and it can range in between there. So I want to be careful not to be prescriptive. But one thing I will be prescriptive about is the importance of having a structured full disclosure at some point. And your therapists who are trained and have experience in the structured full disclosure process is going to help people decide when that needs to happen and how it needs to happen and take you through that process. And that's definitely essential. In fact, we recommend for most couples that it happens within the first year. But again, that's most couples. It's not every couple.
I think this relates to my opinions on having the sex talk with kids. It should never be a definitive one-time conversation. I think it's unhelpful and limiting and often leads to silence on the ongoing need for conversation. It's a similar approach to talking about concepts from the pulpit. If you want us to talk about a subject, you can't just have a one topical sermon a year. If you want to be able to make the church a safe place to talk about sex, pornography, masturbation, you have to bring it up in multiple sermons, not just highlighting it as one sin that we talk about once a year and then we move on. The same goes with relationship. If you are working towards a full life of health, that includes the people that are in that life with you. The conversations that you have with them pertaining to your progress will also be benefiting them because they'll be seeing the work that you're doing. What makes this difficult is they may not be doing the same level of work that you are. And that actually could lend itself to a significant amount of pain and potential for rejection, which is not the end of the world, but feels threatening like it is. And David, you would know a lot more about that than I would. But the breakdown shows up when the husband is working through FirstLight and offering connection to the wife who isn't necessarily ready for it. Her rejection feels so painful that it could lead to questions of, why am I even doing this, from the husband?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first thing I want guys to know about that possibility is that the first thing men need to learn, married or single, is how to manage my sexuality. And I've used my sexuality in the past to manage everything, addressing all of life's pains and frustrations with numbing out sexual behavior. So in resorting to problematic sexual behavior, I have made that my default, but I haven't actually learned how to manage my sexuality itself. I've not learned how to manage my sexual energy, my sexuality. I've learned to mismanage it, but I haven't learned how to manage it. And a lot of guys are going to come to their wives and say, hey, honey, can you manage my sexuality for me? Not in so many words,
Ooh.
but that's going to be her That's going to be her default as well as the wife. My job is to manage your sexuality. And the husband, if he has the same perspective, you can see how you're not setting this couple up for success in this area.
So he's the danger of, look at the success that I have. So now give me what I want within the scriptural bounds of marriage.
Right. Yeah. Weaponizing scripture. Does each member of the couple recognize that she has permission to say, I don't feel like having sex. You need to manage your own sexuality without acting out. It's not her fault if she says no to sex and he isn't able to manage. It's still his responsibility to learn how to manage that.
Especially difficult in a culture that communicates sexuality as a need.
Right.
Like you're not fully human until you have had sex and are continuing to have it. And therefore, we selfishly approach the conversation like, look at me, I've done well, so give me my reward.
Yeah.
Which is not the conversation that I was suggesting needs to be ongoing earlier.
Just to go back to things that husbands and wives are talking about, I don't think spouses can really celebrate with their husbands, oh, you've abstained from looking at porn for 2 years. Hooray!
Right.
Please don't expect your wife to be able to celebrate that. It's like, hey, honey, I've been faithful this whole time, because that anniversary is something very painful for her. Typically, it's around her discovering your behavior, or there's some other, it means something different to her to mark those 2 years.
I think it also feeds into what makes long-term sobriety so difficult. The idea of, if you ever break sobriety again, we're finished.
What that brings up for me is the idea of boundaries. A wife has the right to say, if you act out with another person again, I will need to take actions to keep myself safe.
Yeah.
And that may include divorce. And that's a different boundary than if you look at porn again, these are the consequences of how I will feel about that and the effects that'll have in our relationship. And that's vague, but it's also so difficult to define what that looks like, because it comes down to what is necessary for her to feel safe. And is he willing to do those things to help her feel safe, knowing that he can't make her feel safe?
You saying that's bringing up the reality of somebody doing their own work to be healthier will be communicating with new definitions, yet the person they're talking to will hear the old misuse. If a person's broken sexuality has historically meant whenever I want, whatever I want, whenever I ask for it, to then find health and then to approach their spouse and say, can we do this now, please, in a healthy way? It might not be heard from the spouse in the new meaning.
Right.
And therefore result in fear, rejection, isolation.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a reality in coupleship where, as each person is doing their own work, it's very rare that they're going to line up. As Americans, we want it to be efficient. We want the recovery and restoration process to be efficient, but it never is from our perspective. It's perfectly effective and efficient from God's perspective. But part of that is because the mismatching, right? I'm working on this, she's working on that. It seems like we're working at cross purposes. I would suggest that's intentional on God's part. He needs us to be working in some sense at cross purposes in this season to work through a bigger issue in the long term. And so I see couples getting so caught up in this, oh, we're in such different places. I don't know if we're going to end up in the same place. That's where commitment to the process and commitment to the marriage comes in. Being able to say, this is profoundly uncomfortable. I don't know where we're going to end up, but I'm committed to you, and I'm committed to trying to understand what you're going through, and I'm committed to trying to understand what I'm going through, and recognize the Lord is faithful through all of this. But that is what we're asking people to do. Can you hold space for this person in the mess that they're in right now?
Yeah. And then not only can you hold space, but also can you continue to risk and offer love that may be rejected, which nobody likes to do.
Christ came and was rejected by the very people that should have accepted him and should have known better, and was beaten and crucified and died and buried. The pattern he gives us for life is pick up your cross daily and follow me. And that's a dying to self. If we can take the perspective that this is a lifetime project and not just 6 weeks, 6 months, even 6 years, it's a lifetime. And we're going to keep at it until we learn it better. We'll never learn it perfectly this side of Christ coming back, but we're going to learn it better than we did a year ago, 2 years ago. And that part of living in relationship with another person in the covenant of marriage is doing just that for each other, dying to self and living for the other.
I think that's something people are uncomfortable with. I can still hear the voices of people in my life saying, yeah, but when do you get to stop going to counseling? There's an element of, yeah, things need to change, right? You need to be able to find success. But there's also this idea of ongoing and preventative care and work towards what you were just quoting, dying to self daily. You don't stop carrying your cross after you hit 45 years old. You have to carry your cross into the grave. And that's where Christ does his work of the resurrection.
It is time for questions and comments, the part of the episode where we answer questions or react to comments from the community. Today's question comes from our community. Each year, the holidays prove to be a triggering season for me. How can I avoid relapsing this holiday season?
Go to Hawaii.
Don't listen to Christmas music until December 1st.
Yeah, when it comes to Christmas and the holidays, I like to think of it as the Super Bowl, if I could use a sports ball metaphor. This is what we've trained for. All year long, we've been going to check-in meetings, making phone calls, practicing the presence of God, doing daily work. There's a temptation to say, I'm on vacation, I'm going to take a break, or I'm out of my routine, I'm traveling. And I would suggest that this is when we need to double down on the habits of health we've been putting into place. This is where we need to focus on, how do I stay in the middle of the road so I don't fall into the ditch? It's a great time to intentionally pick up an extra meeting or two a week of looking at their schedule, going into the holidays. Where are they going to be traveling? What meetings are they going to get to?
What's available online?
Who am I going to be calling? Who else is traveling? Who else is going to need a phone call?
I think there's just a quick word on that. One of the things about reaching out that doesn't get focused on too much, it's not always about you. The Holy Spirit is powerful to work through you to call other people. Like, you may call right in the nick of time for somebody that needs a listening ear and a word of encouragement. So even if you're traveling and you're feeling fine, but you have a thought of one of your friends, that could be an opportunity to help them, even if they don't know you're thinking of them. It doesn't take longer than 5 minutes to make a quick call.
I remember one Thanksgiving years ago where my wife and all the girl cousins went out shopping and all the men went and watched some football event on television, and me, being who I am, didn't feel like I belonged with either group. And so I offered to stay at home and take care of the kids. And so then I was like the hero, right? Oh, thanks, David, for taking care of all of our kids so we can go have fun. You know how quickly I turned that into a resentment?
Oof.
Oh, man, it was like light speed. And then the ladies were late, later than I expected anyway, from coming back from their time together.
You handled it with maturity.
Well, I'll tell you what I did. I started making phone calls to dear friends. Hey, happy Thanksgiving. Just wanted to check in with you and say hello. I made that phone call and left that voicemail probably 5 or 6 times. And guys, that wasn't me being rigorously honest. That wasn't me reaching out and making a genuine connection. If I was making a genuine connection, I would have said something like, dude, I am so angry right now that my wife is not back from her shopping trip that she got to go on and have fun. And I am stuck here with the kids, even though I offered to do it. I need you to call me back as soon as you get this, or I might burn the house down. Don't you think if I had left that voicemail instead, my friends would have called me back?
They could have.
It's a better chance than just, hey, we haven't talked in a while. Wanted to say happy Thanksgiving. Bye. Having talked to those friends later and they confirmed with me, oh man, I was looking for an excuse to get out of my dining room. If I had looked at your voicemail, I guess what I'm saying is I didn't have that pattern of reaching out and just staying connected. I was reaching out and making my voicemail not rigorously honest about what was going on with me. And so what I learned from that is if I'm reaching out because I'm feeling anger and resentment, I need to let people know in the voicemail if I want them to call me back and help me out with that. And the holidays, expectations are all over the place, right? This is not a normal situation my wife and I deal with day-to-day, week-to-week basis of her going out and shopping and me staying at home taking care of our kids and a bunch of other kids. This is a holiday-specific situation.
But there is an element to which it's predictable.
Sure.
And knowing the patterns of the past and saying, this is the tradition, this is what we do, this is the destabilizing event that always drives me absolutely crazy. You can get comrades in arms and pull them aside and say, hey, this is what I'm expecting for Christmas. This is what I'm expecting for Thanksgiving. I would love to be able to reach out to you during this time when the traditional moment of that is going on and I can just step out for 5 minutes. You can definitely plan ahead in these moments when you know there will be dysregulation. I think the challenge be that you make the plan and then you don't follow through with it. So staying with your commitments to people, and especially people that are willing to give up their own holiday time to talk with you.
I think that's a great point, Bryce. We generally know our family holiday traditions well enough that we can anticipate what the problem areas might be and strategize with other guys about how we can work together. You know, if each of us is going to be facing particular challenges, we can both map that out and feel mutually supported and say, okay, great. I will call you at this time. You'll call me at that time, and we'll get it all mapped out ahead of time. Oh, we can also talk about unexpected things might happen and what unscheduled phone calls may need to happen.
Sure.
And do all of that on the front end. Maybe it doesn't go according to plan, but at least we had a plan going in.
Yeah.
And then when the bullets start flying, you say, I have other resources available to me. In the past, I would have forgotten about because I'm in this old situation with my family where my muscle memory tells me I never had any other support. And now I do.
This has been Saints and Sexuality. Please subscribe, comment, and share to support this podcast. FirstLight Ministries is a nonprofit funded by the generosity of our donors. If you would like to support FirstLight Ministries or host a FirstLight speaker at your church, visit www.firstlightstlouis.org.